No one understood the Korean businessman until the cleaner made a surprising gesture. David Park slammed his fist on the mahogany table for the third time that morning as the executives from the electronics factory stared at him with puzzled expressions. His words in Korean echoed through the conference room, with no one grasping the frustration pouring from every syllable. The company he had bought 6 months earlier was bleeding money, and he couldn't explain his ideas to turn things around. The American employees watched him with polite confusion, nodding as if they understood. But David knew his instructions were getting lost in the language barrier, like ships in a storm. "Mr. David, maybe we could hire a professional translator," suggested Jennifer Baker, his American business partner, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That would solve our communication problems." David waved impatiently, trying to explain in broken English that it wasn't just about translation, it was about understanding the urgency. The electronics components factory in Dearborn was losing major contracts, and every day of delay meant more losses. Then, he heard a soft voice speaking in perfect Korean. "You're saying you need to implement the Kaizen quality system before you lose the contract with the automaker, right?" Everyone turned, startled. At the door, holding a cleaning bucket and wearing a beige apron over her grey uniform, stood Emily Chen, the cleaner who had been tidying the offices for 3 years. Her dark eyes shone with an intelligence no one had noticed before. David Park felt as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. For the first time in months, someone had understood exactly what he meant. You speak Korean?" he asked in his native tongue, still disbelieving. "I lived in Seoul for 10 years, caring for the elderly in a nursing home," Emily replied, also in Korean. "I learned not just the language, but the customs and the Korean way of thinking." Jennifer Baker cleared her throat, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Emily, you should be cleaning the second-floor bathrooms," she said, her tone icy enough to cut through the air like a blade. "Sorry, Miss Jennifer," Emily murmured, lowering her eyes. "I was just emptying the trash bins." But David Park didn't let her leave. For the first time, he had found someone who could bridge the gap between his plans and the American reality. "Wait," he said in English, gesturing for her to stay. "Can you help? Translate?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Jennifer stood abruptly, her high heels clicking unnecessarily hard on the marble floor. "Mr. David, this is highly inappropriate. We can't have a cleaner participating in strategic meetings. The other employees will find it strange." David looked at Emily, who remained at the door with her head down, then back at Jennifer. Something about his American partner's behavior bothered him, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "Tomorrow, new meeting," he said, trying to sound firm in English. "Emily can stay." "Mr. David," Jennifer laughed stiffly. "You can't be serious. She's just a cleaner." Emily lifted her eyes, and David saw in them a mix of wounded dignity and quiet determination. "If I may, Mr. David," she said in Korean, "I could help you discreetly. I could leave written translations of the key points from your presentations. That way it wouldn't embarrass anyone." The idea was brilliant. David nodded enthusiastically, ignoring the glare Jennifer shot his way. That night, David Park stayed late at the office, preparing a detailed report in Korean about his plans for the company. He wrote about the need to modernize the production system, implement stricter quality controls, and renegotiate contracts that were hurting profit margins. The next morning, he found a sheet of paper under his documents with a perfect English translation written in elegant and precise handwriting. It wasn't just a literal translation. Emily had adapted his ideas for the American context, explaining Eastern concepts in a way the local employees could understand. During the next meeting, David managed to communicate his ideas with a clarity that surprised everyone. The managers finally understood the urgency of the proposed changes and began asking constructive questions. Jennifer remained silent for most of the meeting, but David noticed she took many notes, her face tense with a thoughtful expression he couldn't decipher. In the following days, the secret collaboration between David and Emily deepened. She arrived early to leave translations and stayed late, making sure important documents were organized. David began noticing details he'd ignored before, how Emily observed everything carefully, knew every employee by name, and understood exactly what their concerns were. "You're not just a cleaner, are you?" he asked one morning, finding her organizing papers on his desk. Emily hesitated, her hands pausing over the documents. "In Korea, I was an English teacher for foreigners," she admitted. "But when I returned to the United States, I needed work immediately to support my sick mother. Cleaning was what was available." David felt a tightness in his chest. This woman had sacrificed her career to care for her family and now worked in silence, using her intelligence and knowledge to help him without asking for anything in return. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because people see what they want to see," Emily replied with a sad smile. "To most, I'm just the woman who cleans the bathrooms, and maybe it's better that way. I can observe, listen, and help without anyone suspecting." This revelation changed David's perspective on many things. He began paying attention to the conversations around him, even if he didn't fully understand the words. He noticed how Jennifer spoke at length on the phone in a low, urgent tone, how she frequently met with certain employees, and how her eyes narrowed whenever he showed signs of understanding the company's operations better. A week later, the external auditors arrived for the annual review. David was nervous, but confident the numbers would show the improvements he'd implemented. However, when the reports were presented, something was wrong. Production costs were much higher than he'd calculated, and there were expenses he couldn't identify. Worse, key documents proving the quality system changes were missing. "Mr. Park," the lead auditor said, "these numbers don't match what was reported in the monthly statements. There are significant discrepancies we need to clarify." David looked at Jennifer, who remained too calm for someone facing a problematic audit. "Perhaps it's best to postpone this review until we can organize the documentation better," she suggested smoothly. "Mr. Park is still adjusting to our American procedures." But David didn't want to delay anything. He knew the numbers had been correct when he'd checked them the week before. Something had changed, and he needed to find out what. That night, he decided to return to the office to review all the documents himself. He found Emily on the ground floor putting away the cleaning supplies. "Emily," he called in Korean, "I need your help. Something's wrong with the audit numbers." She followed him to the office, where David had spread all the reports across the table. Together, they began comparing the versions he had prepared with those presented to the auditors. "Look here," Emily murmured, pointing to a specific line. "This amount was altered, and this contract, it wasn't supposed to be renewed under these conditions." David felt his blood run cold. Someone was sabotaging the company's results, and there was only one person with access to all these documents. "Jennifer," he whispered. "Mr. David," Emily warned quietly, "I think someone's coming." Quickly, they put away the papers and pretended David was just reviewing his notes. Moments later, Jennifer appeared at the door, dressed casually and carrying a document folder. "Mr. David, what are you doing here so late?" "Work," he replied simply, trying to keep his voice neutral. Jennifer eyed Emily suspiciously. "And you, Emily? Shouldn't you have finished hours ago?" "I was cleaning the third-floor bathroom, Miss Jennifer. Someone made a terrible mess there." David admired how quickly Emily came up with a plausible excuse. Jennifer seemed to accept the explanation, but her eyes remained watchful. "Well, since you're both here, I might as well grab some documents from my office," she said, heading to her private workspace. As soon as Jennifer disappeared down the hall, Emily moved closer to David. "She shouldn't be here," she whispered in Korean. "And what documents could she possibly need to retrieve on a Saturday night?" David had the same question. He decided to investigate, but knew he had to be careful. He couldn't accuse his business partner without concrete proof, especially as a foreigner in a country he was still learning to navigate. Over the following days, David and Emily developed a discreet surveillance system. She watched Jennifer's movements during the day, noting who she spoke with and which documents she accessed. David checked electronic files at night, comparing versions and identifying changes. What they discovered shocked them. Jennifer wasn't just sabotaging results. She was systematically diverting profitable contracts to a shell company where she was a hidden partner. On top of that, she inflated material costs through suppliers who paid generous kickbacks. She's trying to force a sale of the company, Emily concluded after reviewing all the evidence. If the numbers keep looking bad, you'll be pressured to sell your share for far less than it's worth. David felt betrayed and furious. He had trusted Jennifer to help him adapt to the American market, and she was using that trust to steal his assets. "What can I do?" he asked, feeling lost. "She knows all the American laws, has connections I don't." "If I accuse her without enough proof, we have to be smart," Emily said. "She thinks you don't understand what's happening. Let's use that to our advantage." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The strategy Emily suggested was risky but brilliant. David would pretend to be even more confused and dependent on Jennifer while secretly documenting every irregularity. The goal was to make her feel so secure that she'd slip up or reveal incriminating details. David began acting more lost in meetings, constantly asking for explanations and appearing not to grasp basic business concepts. Jennifer, confident she had fooled her foreign partner, let her guard down. It was during one of these performances that David noticed something that made him question everything he thought he knew. Jennifer was on the phone in her office with the door slightly ajar, and David could clearly hear the conversation. "Don't worry," she was saying. "He has no idea what's going on. In 2 more months we'll have numbers so bad he'll beg to sell, and when that happens, we'll take over the factory at whatever price we want." David felt his blood boil, but forced himself to keep a neutral expression. It was the confirmation he needed, but it still wasn't enough proof. "Emily," he said later when they met in the empty office, "I need to record these conversations, but I don't know how to do it without raising suspicions." "Leave it to me," she replied firmly. "I know someone who can help us." The next day, Emily brought Michael Torres, a former IT employee who had been fired by Jennifer a few months earlier. Michael was bitter about the dismissal, which had been justified as cost-cutting, but he suspected there were political motives behind it. "Ms. Emily told me about the situation," Michael said quietly, as the 3 of them met in the company parking lot. "If you want evidence, I can help. I have access to backup systems and know how to recover deleted files." David nodded, grateful to have allies in this uneven battle. Michael worked overnight, retrieving emails and documents Jennifer thought she had permanently erased. What they found was even worse than they imagined. Not only was she stealing from the company, she was also planning to lay off half the employees as soon as she took full control. "Look at this," Michael murmured, pointing to a spreadsheet on the screen. "She already has a list of who's getting fired. And look at the criteria, all the senior employees who earn better salaries." David realized that among the names marked for termination was Michael himself, along with dozens of workers who had dedicated years of their lives to the company. "We need to warn the employees," he said. "We can't," Emily cautioned. "If she finds out we know, she'll speed up her plans or find a way to frame us. We have to be smarter." The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Dorothy, the woman who had worked in the company cafeteria for 15 years, approached Emily during lunch break. "Emily, my dear," the grey-haired woman said, "can I speak with you privately?" They moved to a quieter corner of the cafeteria. "I'm worried about all this talk," Mrs. Dorothy continued. "The employees are saying the company will be sold, that many will lose their jobs. And there's something strange. Ms. Jennifer has been talking to some department heads, offering raises if they support certain changes." Emily felt a chill. Jennifer was buying loyalties, paving the way to take control without resistance. "Mrs. Dorothy, you know the employees here well, don't you?" "I know them all, dear. Many have worked here since the place opened. They're good, hard-working people who depend on these jobs to support their families. What if I told you there might be a way to save everyone's jobs? Would you help me?" Mrs. Dorothy didn't hesitate. "Of course. These folks are like family to me." That night, Emily organized a secret meeting at Mrs. Dorothy's house. She invited some of the most respected and trustworthy employees, people she knew genuinely cared about the company's future. David was nervous when he heard the plan. "What if someone tells Jennifer?" he asked. "They won't," Emily assured him. "These people have worked here for years. They know when something isn't right." The meeting was small but powerful. Emily carefully explained the situation, presenting only the necessary evidence to prove that Jennifer was intentionally harming the company. The employees were shocked but not surprised. Many had noticed strange changes in recent months. Orders cancelled without explanation, suppliers replaced with more expensive ones, decisions that made no business sense. "I knew something was wrong," said Brian, the production supervisor with 10 years of experience. "My quality reports would disappear from Ms. Jennifer's desk and later reappear with different numbers. And the contracts we lost," added Sarah from the sales team. "Clients who had worked with us for years suddenly switched suppliers, saying our prices were too high." David listened quietly, with Emily discreetly translating the key points. He felt guilty for not noticing what had been happening right under his nose. "What can we do?" asked Brian. "We need more evidence," Emily explained, "and we need to act together. If she realizes we've figured it out, she might destroy documents or escalate the sabotage." That's when Michael had a brilliant idea. "What if we organized a surprise internal audit? I can access the systems and generate reports showing all the discrepancies. If we do it in front of witnesses, she won't be able to deny or alter the data." The plan was risky, but it seemed like the only way to expose Jennifer without giving her time to defend herself or retaliate. David spent the following days anxious, trying to maintain normalcy while secret preparations unfolded around him. Emily coordinated everything with the efficiency of a general, and he wondered how he had underestimated her so much. On the eve of the internal audit, David barely slept. He knew that what happened the next day would define not just the company's future, but also the fate of dozens of families who depended on those jobs. He arrived at the office earlier than usual and found Emily already there, finalizing the last details. "Everything's ready," she said in Korean. "Michael will access the systems at 9 in the morning, in the presence of Mrs. Dorothy and 3 other employees. At 10, you'll call an emergency meeting with all the managers." "What if something goes wrong?" Emily looked at him with a determination he had never seen before. "It won't. The truth has its own power. We just need to give it a chance to come out." At exactly 9 o'clock, Michael began the internal audit. David watched from his office as a small crowd gathered around the computer, seeing numbers and documents that revealed months of systematic manipulation. The murmurs of outrage grew as the evidence became undeniable. Altered spreadsheets, incriminating emails, diverted contracts, all there, recorded in the company's own systems. At 10, David called the emergency meeting. All the managers were present, including Jennifer, who arrived with her usual confidence, unaware of what awaited her. "Good morning," David began in English, his voice steadier than he felt inside. "Today we discovered a serious problem in the company." Jennifer smiled condescendingly. "Mr. David, if there's an issue with the numbers, I can explain." "No need to explain," he interrupted, signaling to Michael. "We have all the evidence right here." Jennifer's expression changed instantly when she saw Michael walk in with a laptop and a folder full of printed documents. "Michael, I thought you didn't work here anymore," she said, trying to keep her tone casual. "I was invited for a special audit," Michael replied, opening the laptop on the meeting table. "And what I found is very interesting." For the next hour, Michael presented evidence after evidence of the systematic sabotage Jennifer had orchestrated. Emails revealing deals with corrupt suppliers, contracts diverted to shell companies, falsified reports. Everything was documented beyond dispute. Jennifer tried to deny it, then tried to justify herself, and finally attempted to counterattack, accusing David of not understanding the American market and trying to pin the blame on her for his own mistakes. But the employees weren't buying her excuses. Many of them had noticed the irregularities for months, and now they finally understood what was happening. "Jennifer," David said, his voice cutting through her excuses, "you're fired, effective immediately." "You can't fire me," she shot back, regaining some of her arrogance. "I'm a partner in this company, and I have connections you can't even imagine. You'll regret this." That's when Emily walked into the room carrying another folder of documents. "Actually," she said calmly, "once you sign the resignation of your partnership shares, you'll have no further ties to the company." Jennifer looked at her with disdain. "You're just a cleaning lady. You have no authority to speak on legal matters." Emily smiled for the first time that tense morning. "I have a law degree from Harvard, specializing in corporate law, and these documents prove you've committed fraud, embezzlement, and sabotage, crimes that could result in prison time and substantial fines." The room fell completely silent. Jennifer opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish out of water. You're a lawyer?" "Among other things," Emily replied. "In Korea, besides teaching English, I also provided legal consulting for American companies looking to expand there. When I returned to the United States, family circumstances didn't allow me to practice law right away, but I never stopped keeping up with legal changes." David looked at Emily with a mix of admiration and disbelief. This woman had been underestimated by everyone, including him, and now she was revealing layers of competence that completely changed the game. Jennifer, realizing she was utterly defeated, tried one last desperate move. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I have friends in the union, in City Hall, in places that can make your lives very difficult." "Maybe," Emily agreed, "but the law is the law, and fraud is fraud, no matter who commits it or what connections they have." Jennifer signed the resignation documents with shaking hands, her empty threats echoing uselessly around the room. When she finally left, she left behind a silence filled with relief and anticipation. David looked around the room, seeing the faces of the employees who had worked tirelessly to keep the company running even during the difficult months. "Thank you," he said in English, emotion clear in his voice. "All of you, thank you so much." Mrs. Dorothy was the first to stand and applaud. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, clapping not just for David, but also for Emily and Michael, the unlikely heroes who had saved their jobs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days following Jennifer's departure, David found himself facing a new set of challenges. He needed to rebuild the business relationships that had been damaged, renegotiate sabotaged contracts, and most importantly, learn how to manage an American company without relying on corrupt middlemen. Emily became his unofficial advisor, helping him navigate the cultural and legal complexities he still didn't fully grasp. But there was something that bothered him. She kept arriving early to clean the offices, as if nothing had changed. "Emily," he said one morning, finding her organizing his desk, "why are you still doing cleaning work? I can offer you a better position in the company." She stopped arranging the papers and looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. David, may I tell you a story?" He nodded, curious. "When I was in Korea caring for the elderly, I learned something important. One of the gentlemen I looked after had been a great businessman, but in his final years what he valued most were the simple gestures, a well-prepared cup of tea, a sincere conversation, someone who truly listened to him." David listened in silence, beginning to understand where she was going with this. "When you clean something," Emily continued, "you pay attention to details others ignore. You come to know the spaces in an intimate way, and you become invisible, which lets you observe how people truly are when they think no one is watching." "But you're far too qualified for this," David protested. "I'm qualified for many things," Emily smiled, "but that doesn't mean I should abandon the ones that taught me valuable lessons. I can be a lawyer, a translator, and a cleaner all at once. Each role gives me a different perspective." David reflected on her words for several days. In Korea, he had grown up in a very hierarchical society, where each person had their clearly defined place. The idea of someone voluntarily maintaining a lower position while performing other roles was hard for him to grasp. But watching Emily work, he began to see the wisdom in her approach. She knew every employee personally, understood their family concerns, and grasped the real dynamics of the company in a way no executive in a meeting room ever could. When the external auditor returned to complete the review that had been interrupted, he found a completely transformed company. The numbers not only matched, They were better than David had originally projected. "Impressive," the auditor remarked. "In 3 weeks, you managed to reverse months of losses. How did you do it?" David glanced at Emily, who was quietly organizing documents at a nearby desk. "Teamwork," he replied, "and the right people in the right places." But the challenges weren't over yet. A week after the successful audit, David received an unexpected visit. 3 men in suits walked into his office unannounced, introducing themselves as representatives of the Metalworkers Union. "Mr. David," said the leader of the group, a burly man with small, calculating eyes, "we heard Ms. Jennifer no longer works here." "That's correct," David confirmed, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Well, Ms. Jennifer had some agreements with us. Agreements we expect to be honored by the new management." David didn't like the implied threat in the man's tone. "What kind of agreements?" "Oh, nothing too complicated. Just some monthly contributions to the union's benefit fund. In return, we make sure there are no labor issues, strikes, that sort of thing." David understood immediately. It was extortion disguised as legitimate union negotiations. "I'll need time to think," he said. Of course," the union man smiled, "but not too much time. It would be a shame if the workers became unhappy with their working conditions." After the men left, David felt as though he had fallen from one trap into another. Getting rid of Jennifer had solved the internal problem, but now he discovered she had created a web of corrupt deals that extended beyond the company. Emily found him that afternoon, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. "What happened?" she asked in Korean. David shared about the union representative's visit and their implied demands. "They want a bribe to avoid causing trouble," he concluded. "If I pay, I'll be feeding the same corrupt system Jennifer created. If I don't, they might stop production." Emily thought for a moment. "I can talk to the employees," she finally said. "Many are union members, but they don't necessarily support this kind of practice. If they understand the situation, maybe we can find a solution. Do you think it'll work?" "It's worth a try. Most people prefer working in an honest environment, even if it means facing some challenges." That evening, Emily organized another meeting at Mrs. Dorothy's house. This time, she invited representatives from every department, including some of the most respected unionized workers. The response was more positive than David had expected. The workers were tired of seeing part of their wages deducted for a union that seemed more interested in enriching its leaders than genuinely defending them. "They've pressured me twice to support a strike," said Robert, a welder with 8 years at the company. "But when I asked what the specific demands were, they couldn't give me a straight answer." "And then there's the issue of extra deductions," added Amanda from the administrative team. "Every month, there's a new fee for some fund or benefit we never see." David listened to the employees' complaints and realized the problem was more complex than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about corruption. It was a system that had persisted for years, benefiting a few at the expense of many. "What do you think we should do?" he asked. "Stand up to them," said Brian, the production supervisor. "If the company is doing well, if our jobs are secure and our wages are paid on time, why should we have to pay bribes just to work in peace?" The decision was made democratically. The workers would support David in refusing to pay the bribes, though they all understood it might mean a few tough weeks ahead. The union's reaction was swift and predictable. The following Monday, they showed up at the factory gates with signs and megaphones, trying to convince the workers to strike. But something unexpected happened. Instead of joining the strike, the employees came out to talk to the union reps, explaining why they disagreed with the blackmail tactics. The discussion was tense, but civil. The workers made it clear they supported the union when it truly defended them, but not when it tried to extort the company where they worked. David watched from his window, impressed by the employees' maturity and courage. Emily was in the crowd, occasionally translating for him, but mostly observing and ensuring things didn't get out of hand. After 2 hours of debate, the union reps left without stopping production. They had underestimated the loyalty David had earned by saving everyone's jobs. But the victory came at a cost. In the following weeks, the company faced a series of surprise inspections from various city agencies. Health inspectors, fire marshals, labor officials, It seemed someone was trying to find any excuse to cause trouble. David grew increasingly stressed. Each day brought new red tape to untangle, another questionable fine to dispute, another obstacle that seemed deliberately placed in his path. During one particularly difficult inspection, the accumulated stress began taking a physical toll. His voice grew hoarse during a meeting with the inspectors, and the next morning he woke up completely voiceless. The doctor said it was laryngitis, caused by stress which would last a few days. Ironically, David found himself once again in the position of being unable to communicate just when he needed to speak the most. Emily naturally took on the role of spokesperson, dealing with inspectors and staff while David recovered. But there was one meeting that couldn't be postponed. The General Employee Assembly had been scheduled for that day, where David planned to explain the whole situation and ask for the workers' official support. "I can't cancel," he wrote on a piece of paper for Emily. "It's too important. I can speak for you," she offered. "I'll translate your ideas." David hesitated, not because he doubted Emily's ability, but because he knew this was a responsibility he should take on personally. The assembly was set for 2 in the afternoon in the factory yard. When the time came, all the employees were present, from the factory floor workers to the department managers. David stepped onto the small makeshift platform, looked at the sea of expectant faces, and tried to speak. But only a hoarse whisper came out, one no one could hear. Emily stepped onto the platform beside him. "Mr. David has lost his voice temporarily due to the stress of the past few weeks," she explained, "but he asked me to deliver an important message to all of you." David nodded gratefully, but motioned for her to step down. He wanted to try speaking himself, even if it was just a whisper. Emily hesitated, but honored his request. David stood alone before the employees, trying to find a way to communicate without a voice. Then he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of trying to whisper in English, he began speaking in Korean, using expressive gestures to accompany his words. He knew most wouldn't understand, but perhaps he could convey his sincerity through emotion and body language. He spoke about how he had come to the United States full of expectations and fears, how he had felt lost and misunderstood, and about the gratitude he felt for everyone who had helped him navigate a new and complex world. The employees listened in respectful silence, even without understanding his words. There was something in David's posture, in the intensity of his gestures, that communicated more than any translation could. When he finished, the silence lingered for a few seconds. Then Emily stepped back onto the platform. "May I translate what Mr. David said?" she asked. David nodded but gestured for her to wait. There was something more he wanted to say, and this time he knew exactly how. He stepped down from the platform and walked over to where Mrs. Dorothy stood. Bowing respectfully before the gray-haired woman, he said in a whisper just loud enough to hear, "Thank you for taking care of all of us." The simple gesture moved the employees deeply. Mrs. Dorothy began to cry, and soon others were wiping their eyes too. David continued walking among the workers, thanking each one personally. Brian for his dedicated work, Amanda for her flawless organization, Michael for his courage in exposing the truth, Robert for his loyalty. When he reached Emily, he paused a little longer. "You saved everything," he said in English, his voice hoarse but full of emotion. "Thank you." Emily felt tears streaming down her face, but remained steady. "We saved it together," she replied. "All of us." The assembly ended without many words being spoken, but with a deep understanding among everyone present. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them united. In the weeks that followed, the attempts at external pressure gradually faded. The company had shown it wouldn't yield to blackmail, and the employees had demonstrated their support for honest management, even when it meant facing temporary hardships. David regained his voice, but discovered he'd learned to communicate in ways beyond words alone. He observed more, listened more carefully, and paid closer attention to the gestures and expressions of those around him. The company didn't just survive the crisis, it thrived. The contracts Jennifer had sabotaged were recovered, new clients appeared through referrals from satisfied employees, and productivity increased significantly. But perhaps the most important change happened in the company's internal culture. Rigid hierarchies gave way to more open communication, where ideas were valued regardless of who proposed them. David instituted monthly meetings, where any employee could present suggestions to improve processes or working conditions. To his surprise, some of the best ideas came from people who traditionally had no voice in corporate decisions. It was during one of these meetings that Emily made a proposal that would further change the company's dynamics. "Mr. David," she said, "I've noticed many employees have skills and knowledge not being used in their current roles. Robert, for example, is a welder, but also has experience in electronics. Amanda from administration speaks fluent English. Brian knows a lot about quality management." David was intrigued. "What do you suggest?" "That we create an internal exchange program," Emily explained, "where people can teach each other their special skills. Robert could teach basic electronics, Amanda could teach English, you could teach about Korean culture and management techniques." The idea was revolutionary for a traditional factory. Normally, employees were hired for specific roles and expected to stay in those positions throughout their careers. But David saw the potential in the proposal. A more diverse and educated workforce would be more flexible, creative, and engaged. "And you?" he asked. "What would you teach?" Emily smiled. "Languages, basic legal rights for workers, and maybe something about seeing opportunities where others only see problems." The program was implemented gradually, starting with voluntary sessions during lunch breaks. The response was enthusiastic. Employees who had worked side by side for years discovered talents and interests they'd never shared. Mrs. Dorothy revealed she knew a lot about household accounting and began teaching personal financial planning. Michael, beyond his IT expertise, discovered a talent for explaining complex concepts simply. David, initially hesitant about teaching, ended up leading some of the most popular sessions, discussing cultural differences between the United States and Korea and how these differences could be bridges for international business opportunities. But it was Emily's lesson on turning obstacles into opportunities that had the greatest impact. "When I arrived from Korea," she told a group of employees gathered in the cafeteria, "I was devastated. I'd left a promising career to care for my sick mother, and the only job I could get was cleaning." The employees listened intently. "For weeks, I felt humiliated, diminished. I thought I'd wasted my education and experience, but then I realized something important. Every job taught me something valuable, even if I didn't recognize it at the time." "What did cleaning teach you?" Amanda asked. "To pay attention to details others ignore. To be invisible when necessary, but observe everything. To value the dignity of every kind of work. And most importantly, not to judge people by their job titles, but by the character they show." Emily's words resonated deeply with the employees. Many of them had been through similar situations, skilled workers who had taken lesser positions out of necessity, but gradually lost hope of using their true abilities. "The secret," Emily continued, "isn't waiting for opportunities to appear. It's creating opportunities from the circumstances you have, even when they seem limited." In the months that followed, this philosophy spread through the company almost organically. Employees began proposing creative improvements, taking on responsibilities beyond their job descriptions, and collaborating in unexpected ways. The transformation didn't go unnoticed in the industry. Other companies started asking about the Korean methods David was implementing, unaware that it was actually a unique fusion of Eastern pragmatism and American creativity. It was during a business fair in Chicago that David had a major revelation about what had happened in his company. He was presenting the factory's results to potential investors when an older Korean businessman approached him. "David Park," the man said in Korean, "I'm William Kim. I've heard great things about your company." David greeted Mr. Kim respectfully. He was a legend in the Korean business community in the United States. "I'm curious," Mr. Kim said, "how you managed to adapt our management methods to the American environment so quickly. Many of us take years to understand the local mindset." David thought about the question. How could he explain that his greatest lesson had come from a janitor who spoke Korean? "I've learned that adapting doesn't mean imposing," he finally replied. "It means finding points of connection between different cultures." "Interesting." And how did you find those points of connection? David smiled, thinking of Emily. Through someone who taught me to look beyond appearances, someone who showed me that the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected people. Mr. Kim nodded, intrigued. I'd like to meet this person. We might have something to learn too. When David returned to the factory, he told Emily about his conversation with William Kim. He wants to meet you, David said. He thinks you could help other Korean companies adapt to the United States. Emily was surprised and a little worried. Mr. Park, I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. I'm still just... You're not just anything, David interrupted firmly. You're a consultant, a lawyer, a translator, a teacher, and so much more. It's time to stop underestimating yourself. The meeting with William Kim took place the following week. The seasoned businessman was impressed not only by Emily's knowledge of both cultures, but also by her practical approach to resolving intercultural conflicts. You have a rare gift, he told Emily. The ability to translate not just words, but mindsets. That's extremely valuable in international business. Mr. Kim offered Emily a position at his consulting firm, helping Korean companies establish themselves in the United States. The salary was 10 times what she earned at the factory. David's heart sank when he heard about the offer. He knew Emily deserved the opportunity, but he couldn't imagine the company running without her. Are you going to accept? He asked, trying to hide his concern. Emily hesitated for a long moment. It's an incredible opportunity, she finally said, but I'm not sure it's what I really want. What do you mean? Mr. Park, I've learned that success isn't just about money or social status. It's about impact, about making a difference in people's lives. Here I see the direct results of my work every day, in the faces of the employees, in the company's prosperity, in the community we've built. David watched her speak, impressed once again by her wisdom. But perhaps, Emily continued, we could create something that combines the best of both worlds. What do you mean? What if we turned our factory into a model, a place where other companies could come to learn about cultural integration, participatory management, and valuing hidden talents? The idea was ambitious and exciting. Instead of Emily leaving the company to help others, they could bring other businesses in to learn from the model they had created. David liked the proposal, but knew implementing it would be a huge challenge. We'd need the right space, resources, employee approval, and we'd need to prove our model actually works in the long run, Emily added. We can't teach something we're still learning ourselves. They decided to give it a year to solidify the changes in the company before considering expanding the concept. During that time, David and Emily worked together to document every process, methodology, and lesson learned. It was a year of intense growth. The company not only maintained its profitability, it surpassed all initial projections. More importantly, it created a work environment that became a regional benchmark. The internal exchange program evolved into a formal professional development system. Employees could dedicate part of their time to learning new skills or teaching their specialties to colleagues. Mrs. Dorothy, for example, discovered she had a talent for conflict mediation and began serving as an informal counselor when disagreements arose among staff. Michael developed an online suggestion system that allowed anyone to propose process improvements. David implemented an advisory board made up of employees at all levels, which met monthly to discuss the company's strategic issues. Final decisions were still his, but they were now informed by far more diverse perspectives. The turning point came during an unexpected visit from federal government auditors. Unlike the hostile inspections of the past, this was an audit of best business practices, part of a project to identify companies that could serve as examples for others. The auditors spent a week at the factory, interviewing employees, analyzing processes, and observing workplace dynamics. In the end, their report was exceptionally positive. This company represents a unique model of intercultural management, they wrote. It has successfully combined operational efficiency with social responsibility, creating an environment where human development and commercial success reinforce each other. The report recommended the factory be included in a government business mentorship program, where successful companies would share their practices with other organizations. David and Emily saw this as the validation they needed to implement their original idea. They began developing a structured program of visits and workshops where interested companies could spend a few days at the factory learning about their methods. The first group of visitors arrived 6 months later, executives from 5 different companies, all facing challenges similar to what David had once dealt with: communication problems, low productivity, internal conflicts. Emily led most of the workshops, explaining not just the techniques they had implemented, but the philosophy behind them. "The secret isn't in copying specific methods," she explained during one session. "It's about understanding the fundamental principles: mutual respect, open communication, valuing all talents, and the courage to see opportunities where others only see problems." The visitors were impressed not just by the company's numbers, but by the work environment. It was clear that the employees were genuinely engaged and happy. "How did you measure the success of the changes?" asked one of the visiting executives. David answered the question. "Numbers are important," he said, "but they aren't everything. We also measure it by how often employees propose new ideas, how they resolve conflicts among themselves, and their willingness to take on extra responsibilities when needed. And by the smiles on people's faces," added Mrs. Dorothy, who was serving coffee to the group. "I've worked here for 15 years, and I've never seen so much joy in this place." Mrs. Dorothy's simple words had more impact on the visitors than any statistic could. In the following months, the mentorship program grew organically. Companies that had participated in the workshops recommended the experience to other organizations. David and Emily had to hire additional help to meet the demand. More importantly, they began receiving success reports from companies that had implemented adapted versions of their methods. Not all succeeded. Some organizations weren't truly willing to change their internal cultures, but a significant percentage showed measurable improvements. It was during one of these progress reports that David received an unexpected call. It was William Kim, the Korean businessman who had offered Emily a job. "David Park," said Kim, "I'm impressed by what I've heard about your company. It seems you've created something truly special." "Thank you, Mr. Kim. I have a proposal for you and Ms. Emily. We'd like to fund the expansion of your program, create a formal training center, develop structured materials, perhaps even franchise the concept to other regions." It was a tempting offer, but David knew he needed to talk with Emily and the employees before making any decision. A meeting with all staff was scheduled for the following Friday. David explained Kim's proposal and the opportunities it represented. "But I want to be clear," he said. "Any decision we make will be together. This company belongs to all of us, and its future should be decided by all of us." The discussions that followed were intense and passionate. Some employees were excited about the possibility of growth and national recognition. Others feared expansion would change the close-knit, family-like nature of the company. Emily listened to all viewpoints before speaking. "May I share a thought?" she finally said. "When we began this journey, our goal wasn't to create a business model to export. It was to solve specific problems we had here." The employees listened carefully. "But along the way, we discovered something important. Genuine solutions to real problems have universal value. If other companies can benefit from what we've learned, perhaps we have a responsibility to share." "But how do we ensure we don't lose our essence?" asked Brian. "By keeping our values at the center of everything," Emily replied. "No matter how big or complex the program becomes, the core principles must remain the same: respect, authenticity, valuing every person." The final decision was made by secret ballot. By a narrow margin, the employees chose to accept the expansion proposal, but with clear conditions. The original factory would remain as is, serving as a living lab for new methods. Any profits from the mentorship program would be shared among all employees, and Emily would continue dividing her time between consulting activities and direct work at the factory. The launch of the Center for Excellence in Intercultural Management took place 2 years later, at a ceremony that brought together business leaders, academics, and government representatives. But for David, the most meaningful moment wasn't the official speech or the congratulations from dignitaries. It was when he saw Emily talking to a group of young interns, explaining to them the importance of never underestimating anyone, of always looking for the hidden potential in every person. "The greatest lesson I've learned," she said, "is that real transformation begins when we stop seeing limitations and start seeing possibilities. And that applies to companies as much as it does to people." One of the interns raised their hand. "But how did you know Mr. Park would be receptive to your ideas? What if he had reacted badly?" Emily smiled, remembering that first day when she had heard David speaking Korean in the meeting room. "I didn't know," she admitted. "But sometimes you have to have the courage to act even without guarantees. The worst that could have happened was him saying no. The best that could have happened was, well, all of this you see today." David watched the scene from afar, reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken together. From a lost businessman and an underestimated cleaner, they had become partners in creating something that was impacting hundreds of others. But perhaps the deepest transformation had been personal. David was no longer the isolated, frustrated man who had arrived in the United States years before. He had learned not just to speak English, but to speak the universal language of mutual respect and genuine collaboration. And Emily had rediscovered that her worth didn't depend on titles or external recognition. Her strength lay in her ability to see potential where others saw only problems, to build bridges where others saw only barriers. During the celebration party for the center's launch, Mrs. Dorothy approached David with an emotional expression. "Mr. David," she said, "can I tell you a secret?" David nodded, curious. "In the first few months after you arrived, I was worried. I thought the changes would ruin the family-like atmosphere we had here, that we'd become one of those cold, impersonal companies. And now? Now I see I was completely wrong." Mrs. Dorothy smiled. "You didn't change our family, you expanded it, and you taught us that we can be professional and successful without losing our humanity." Mrs. Dorothy's words touched David deeply. He realized that had been his greatest achievement, not the financial numbers or professional recognition, but the creation of a place where people felt valued as whole human beings. Later that night, after all the guests had left, David and Emily stayed alone in the office, reflecting on the day. "Do you think we did the right thing?" David asked. "Expanding like this?" "I think we did the authentic thing," Emily replied. "And when you do something authentic, with the right motivations, it's usually the right thing too." David looked out the window, seeing the lights of the factory still running on the night shift. Employees he knew by name were there, working with the same engagement and pride that had become the company's trademark. "Emily," he said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret not accepting Mr. Kim's offer 2 years ago? The salary was much higher, the prestige too." Emily reflected for a moment before answering. "Sometimes I wonder how my life would have been if I had made different choices," she said honestly. "But I never regret it, because I've learned that real happiness doesn't come from having what you want, but from wanting what you have, and I love what we've built here." "Even though you still clean offices twice a week?" Emily laughed. "Especially because of that. It keeps me grounded, reminds me where we came from. And besides," she winked at him, "it was while cleaning your office that I noticed you scribbled in Korean when you were nervous. Without that little detail, I might never have had the courage to talk to you that first day." David also laughed, remembering his anxious scribbles during those early weeks. "So you were spying on me from the start?" "I was observing," Emily corrected, "and I saw someone who needed help, but was too proud to ask. And you were too bold not to offer." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Mr. David," Emily finally said, "can I ask you something too?" "Of course." "What would you say to that frustrated man who used to pound his fist on the table during meetings if you could go back in time?" David thought carefully before answering. "I'd tell him to stop trying to be understood and start trying to understand," he said at last. "I'd say real communication doesn't happen when you speak louder, but when you listen deeper." "And would you say anything else?" "I'd tell him that the best opportunities sometimes come disguised as obstacles, and that the most valuable people might be right in front of you, going unnoticed because you're looking in the wrong places." Emily smiled, pleased with his answer. "You know what makes me proudest in all of this," she said. "What?" That we proved real transformation is possible, not just in numbers or processes, but in people. Every employee who gained confidence, every idea that was valued, every barrier that was broken. Those are human victories that go far beyond business. David nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The training center thrived in the following years, attracting companies from across the United States and even other North American countries. But the true measure of its success wasn't in the certificates it issued or the contracts it signed. It was in the stories that began to pour in. Accounts of companies that had transformed their workplace cultures, employees who discovered talents they never knew they had, conflicts resolved through dialogue instead of confrontation. One of the most touching stories came from a textile factory in Pennsylvania. The owner had attended a workshop and been struck by the idea of valuing employees' hidden knowledge. When he implemented a similar program at his company, he discovered that one of the seamstresses had a degree in fashion design, but had been forced to take an assembly line job out of financial necessity. By giving her the chance to contribute to new product development, the company not only improved its clothing line but significantly increased its market share. "That's exactly what we hoped would happen," Emily said when she heard the story. "It's not about creating a rigid model for everyone to copy. It's about inspiring people to see what they already have in a new light." David agreed completely. They had learned that every company, every situation had its own unique aspects. There was no one-size-fits-all solution, but there were universal principles: respect, authenticity, valuing human potential that could be adapted to any context. The center's success also brought unexpected challenges. With the growing demand, David and Emily had to hire more consultants and better structure their programs. There was a constant risk that expansion would compromise the quality or authenticity of their work. To prevent this, they established a rule. All new consultants had to spend at least 6 months working directly in the original factory, learning not just the methods, but experiencing the culture that had shaped them. "Theory without practice is empty," Emily would explain to the new hires, "but practice without reflection is blind. You need to understand not just what we do, but why we do it and how we got here." This approach ensured that even as they grew, the center maintained its original essence. Each consultant brought their own perspective and experience, enriching the program, but always within the core values David and Emily had established. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this transformation journey? Do you believe small actions can truly change entire companies? Which character inspired you most? David with his courage to change, or Emily with her quiet wisdom? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and your own stories of overcoming challenges. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories that show how life can surprise us in the most unexpected moments.